Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines, Uncovering Dementia Myths. My name is Erin Crawford. I'm the Program Director here at the Alzheimer's Society of Manitoba, and I'm going to be your MC for tonight's online event. From aluminum pots and pans to believing that dementia is a normal part of aging, we've come a long way in our understanding of myths about dementia. And tonight we're back to uncover fascinating discoveries and disappointing conclusions in dementia research, even talk about a term that's brand new to me tonight, schmooze. That's just a teaser. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. I am going to look at my notes, which I know is not always the most engaging way to hear from somebody, but if I'm not looking at my notes, I'm going rogue, and that might also happen. But I am going to try and stick a little bit to my notes here tonight to try and keep us on time, because I know that everybody's time is valuable to you and you want to get through the stories that we're going to present to you. Before we get started, I'm going to acknowledge the First Peoples on whose traditional territories we live and work. The Alzheimer's Society of Manitoba's head office is located on Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect both the land and the people of this land, including all Indigenous people who have walked in this place, and we respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of collaboration. Today is World Alzheimer's Day, and while it's not the kind of day that is a celebration sort of day, it is an important opportunity for us to talk about dementia and to show our support for families living with the disease. A new study by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada shows that the rates of dementia across Canada will increase at an alarming rate over the next 30 years. Including an increase of 124% here in Manitoba. But the same report says that there are things we can do to reduce our risk, and that if we're able to delay the onset of dementia in people by even 1 year, we would see almost 500,000 fewer cases of dementia diagnosed by 2050. Delaying the onset of dementia could also have an enormous impact, but the growth in new cases will still be significant. These numbers further strengthen the need for all of us to pay attention to dementia and to fund the research and services needed to really make a difference in the lives of people affected by the disease. Those of you joining us tonight already know the challenges of dementia and the importance of taking action to reduce its impact, and we thank you for joining us tonight. It's also why it's so important that we continue to support dementia research, and we're pleased that tonight, among you in the audience, who we can't see because of the webinar format that we're using, is Frances Delicata, a Manitoba researcher receiving funding this year from the Alzheimer's Society Research Program. Frances Delicata is a local researcher from the University of Manitoba whose study is looking at new treatment options for dementia. Through the Alzheimer's Society and our supporters, we enable Frances and others to look at new ways to prevent the disease, improve the quality of life for those who are affected, and ultimately, we hope to find treatments and a cure for the disease. Now, I would like to take a moment to thank Brightwater Senior Living of Winnipeg for their generous support as the event sponsor of tonight's research forum. With the financial support that they provide, we're able to host this event free of charge. Here's Kim Knott, the Area Director of Brightwater Senior Living of Canada, with a few words.
Hello, I'm Kim Knott, the Area Director of Brightwater Senior Living of Canada. Brightwater is proud to support the Alzheimer's Society because we know firsthand how dementia and Alzheimer's affects those living with the disease. The Alzheimer's Society provides support, education, and resources to healthcare providers, families, and Manitobans. We hope that you enjoy the forum again this year.
Thank you so much, Kim and Brightwater, but their support for our event tonight is really, really important to us. So we thank you once again. So tonight's speaker, who you probably see up there somewhere, tonight's speaker is an internationally recognized researcher in drug design for neurological disorders. He's both a medicinal chemist and clinical neurologist. He's published widely in both chemistry and neurology, including peer-reviewed papers and a popular medicinal chemistry textbook. Did you know there was such a thing? Well, there is, and it's his. Focusing his work on practical research that can help make a difference, he holds 27 patents and another 62 patents pending, and has founded or co-founded multiple biotech companies. He's designed 2 drugs that have reached phase 3 human trials and has 4 others in preclinical development. He's won numerous national and international research awards, and tonight he's going to uncover some dementia myths and talk to us about ongoing dementia research, controversial outcomes, and what lies ahead. The director of Krembil Research Institute in Toronto, the world-renowned and award-winning scientist, Dr. Donald Weaver. Welcome back.
Hi, glad to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Dr. Weaver. You were here with us last year. We had a really engaging and interesting discussion about some news items at that point in time. And of course, there's been a year of news stories since then.
It's been eventful, yeah.
It has been really eventful. So there's a few things for us to talk about. And actually, it was challenging to identify the things that we should narrow it down to tonight.
I hope your questions aren't too hard.
I don't think so. I'll let people know. So we've identified some stories that we've asked Dr. Weaver to respond to. And the way that this is going to go is we're going to show the story. We're going to ask Dr. Weaver his take on that so you can get a bit of a behind the scenes on things. But you'll also, as anybody who's watching tonight, you'll have the opportunity, because we're in a webinar format, we're going to ask you, so you don't have your cameras on and you don't have your microphones on. So that's not a mistake. If you're busy searching for those, we didn't let you have that this time. Because when we have a large group of people, it can become difficult and distracting. So instead, what we're going to ask you to do, there is a Q&A button at the bottom, and you can put your questions for Dr. Weaver in there. And those questions can be about the topics that we're covering, or it can be something else. You can try and stump him on a subject he's not expecting, that you're interested in that we haven't covered. And at the end, we will go into that Q&A and do our best to answer as many questions as we can. And we're also going to plan to stick to our schedule and get you out of here by 7:45, because again, I know that everybody's got busy schedules. So go ahead and type those questions in there. Oh, I also want to tell you, everything you put in the chat is visible to everybody. Everybody who's here, there's 243 people. So be careful what you put in the chat. Okay, with that said, the first story that we picked for tonight, Dr. Weaver, is a research story out of Sweden. The article is published in Healthline, and it suggested that having more than one cardiometabolic disease at the same time can double your risk of developing dementia. So I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about cardiometabolic diseases, what they are, and how they increase our risk of dementia.
One of your opening slides before we got going listed the 12 risk factors that are commonly associated with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I think it's important that we recognize there are risk factors and that we can reduce our risks. And increasingly, it's being recognized that stroke, heart attacks, vascular disease, and metabolic diseases, particularly type 2 diabetes, but increasingly we recognize other metabolic disorders such as non-alcoholic fat infiltration of the liver. There's a variety of other metabolic disorders. And clearly there is definite epidemiological evidence which says that these are definitely risk factors. They really are risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And so I don't think that is debated. The question which is much more debated is, what is the mechanism? How? It's clear that type 2 diabetes is a risk factor. It's clear that vascular disease is a risk factor, but the exact way in which it ties in is not clear. And that's certainly open to a lot of ongoing study and research. Clearly, stroke is a risk factor, and stroke and stroke-related dementia overlaps with Alzheimer's a lot, and they're mixed and combined disorder not infrequently. And so this and vascular disease on one side and metabolic disease on the other side go together. So by vascular disease, I'm talking about traditional heart attacks and strokes and angina and mini strokes or TIAs. And on the metabolic side, we're talking, yes, about individuals who have type 2 diabetes, but metabolic syndrome also occurs in people who are significantly obese, etc. And so these two are naturally connected to each other anyway. And joining the triangle at the top is dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And so I think it's important to recognize these are risk factors dealing with your diabetes, dealing with your obesity and these other issues is not only good for your heart, it's also good for your brain. It's also good at trying to prevent Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, I think that's a connection. I mean, most people know that the things that they need to do to prevent heart disease and stroke, but I think that it's that connection to dementia that maybe isn't something that everybody is really.
Exactly, and we have to recognize it. It's there just as much as it is for anything else.
Is there a family history connection? So can I, if I'm worried, if I have a family history of heart disease, for example,
yep,
does that mean I might expect to be at higher risk of dementia, or do we know that yet?
I mean, and I think that the answer to that is yes. Certainly, if you're at higher risk for these vascular problems like a heart attack, like stroke, you run an increased risk of dementia, you run an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. Yes.
Okay, that's really interesting. And because I don't know how often people's family doctors are having that conversation with them. So I think for the people who are joining,
probably never.
Yeah. So for people who are joining tonight, it's the kind of thing where you would want to bring up that conversation, or at least be aware, watching for your own sort of signs and symptoms. If you know you've got either that family history or yourself, you've been diagnosed, your doctor may not realize there's that connection. But the people joining here watching tonight do know that, so they know to watch for that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Important thing to watch for.
Yeah. Okay. So the next topic that we're going to move on to, we're going to put up a poll first, and we're going to ask our audience to weigh in on the poll. Or I think we're going to put up a poll. There you go. Do you think COVID-19 has lasting effects on brain function? And I see Dr. Weaver's laughed a little bit at that. So the options are yes, no, or maybe. And we're going to give people a minute here to complete that. Actually, preliminary results here, I would say people aren't sure actually what to think. And that's not
probably a safe answer.
Probably. We'll put up the poll results here in a second here. All right. Can everybody see those poll results? Oh, you can't answer me. Anyways, so 55% of people think that COVID-19 has lasting effects on brain function. 36% think maybe, 9% say no. Not surprising given how brand new this is. I mean, this wasn't something we were talking about last year, where we were just sort of unsure, but talking about it, I don't think we were even talking about this last year. So this relates to the next news story, which is study links COVID-19 with long-term elevated risk of brain fog. And we're going to just play a little video here.
A warning this morning for people who have had COVID-19. A new study coming out of the University of Oxford, the largest of its kind, suggesting that 2 years after infection, there is still an elevated risk of brain fog, dementia, and other neurological conditions. Abby Kugadasan is on the story for us in London. Good morning, Abby. Let's talk about what's in this report.
John, the University of Oxford study has compared two groups. One group of more than 1 million people who had COVID about 2 years ago, and another group which includes people with different respiratory infections. And this was to better understand the long-lasting damage caused by the coronavirus. They looked at 14 different disorders and how likely these groups were to be at risk. And the study found that those who had survived COVID had about a 10 to 15% higher chance of some of these long-term conditions. A Adults under the age of 64 were more likely to experience brain fog. Seniors, people over the age of 65, had a higher chance of dementia.
There's more to that story, but Dr. Weaver, I guess first, can you tell us the difference between dementia and brain fog?
Certainly. So it's the same thing as the differentiating dementia from delirium. And so dementia is a chronic, progressive, continuous disorder. So individuals who have dementia certainly are continuing to progress and continuing to get worse, and there's no evidence that they're going to improve. With brain fog, the answer's still out. But lots of individuals who have COVID-19, certainly in the days, weeks, and months following their initial infection, get what they call this brain fog, where they're just not cognitively what they should be. They're not themselves. They have trouble formulating their ideas. They have trouble stringing sentences together, etc. Now, it goes away in some people. And the fact that it was temporary and improved certainly would differentiate it from dementia, because dementia doesn't go away. Once it's there to stay. Now, the bigger question is COVID-19 going to be a risk factor in the ultimate goal of causing Alzheimer's disease? And I must admit that we published a paper which is the nth wave of COVID. Will it be Alzheimer's? Because, people are talking about, oh, we're in the 6th wave and the 7th wave. Well, 20 years from now, when we're still in a distant wave, will that be Alzheimer's? Who knows? It's not clear yet. I mean, we're still in the early days of COVID. I know it feels like it's been around a long time, but it hasn't been. We're still in the early days of this disorder. Now, I think that when it first came out, everyone had the notion that this was somehow a pulmonary virus, a lung virus, and that, you got it and you coughed and, and you may get pneumonia, etc. What I don't think people realize that this is also a virus that's present in the brain. This is a virus that can get into your brain and can wreak the same havoc in your brain that it is within your lungs, and it can give you an inflammatory problem. And in addition to the brain fog that is seen, there are individuals who have very significant headache disorders. There are people who develop seizures and epilepsy. There's a wide range of neurologic problems which are being seen as a consequence of COVID-19. Now, when you get a virus in the brain, your brain responds just like any other organ. The immune system turns on. So, if you get an infection in your lungs, from anything, you're going to get your immune system, your lung turning on, trying to deal with it. So if you get COVID-19 in your brain, the immune system gets turned on in your brain. What are the consequences of turning on inflammation in your brain? What are the consequences of turning on the immune system in your brain in the long term?
How do I know? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but how do I? You don't. I want to know if I got COVID-19 in my brain, or if I didn't.
Well, one could arguably do a spinal tap on you, I don't want it. Neither do you. And if you've got the headache associated with COVID-19, the last thing you want is someone doing a spinal tap on you. You don't really know. But shall we say, if you've had COVID-19 and you've had very prolonged neurologic symptoms thereafter, you probably got the virus probably went into your brain, and you probably got an inflammatory response in your brain from it. The issue then is, does it dampen down and disappear, or does it hang around in a sort of like quiet, indolent little sort of way, just continuing to burn without you knowing it? That we don't know. But if that's the case, it would probably be a risk factor in the long term for Alzheimer's. So is that a reasonable question to bring up? Yes. Do we know the answer? No. time is going to tell. And we all have our fingers crossed that it's not a risk factor, but there's reason to believe that at least it might be.
I guess, like so many things with COVID-19, it being such a new virus, there's things that we just simply don't have the ability to tell.
That's
at
right.
this point. So we sit unknowing. And with most of us, really, if not all of us, having been infected probably at this point. So if we say it's a risk factor for dementia, it's potentially a risk factor that we all...
And this is going to be hard to sort out in future, because 30 years from now, you know, determining who had how COVID back and how severe it was and those sorts of issues, going to be really difficult to sort out. The future of COVID is going to be just as controversial as the first 2 to 3 years have been.
Do you think that there will be researchers doing a lot of
I sincerely hope so.
We know there's not enough dementia research happening, period.
Yeah, no, there's not enough. And, you know, but this is a huge public health issue. I mean, you look at the stats coming out of the United Kingdom today. I mean, their latest wave of COVID is taking off. And, you know, and even if 2 to 3% of people with COVID end up developing, say, Alzheimer's disease, those are huge numbers. You know, those are big numbers. And so clearly this is a public health issue which demands scrutiny and further evaluation and study. I'm optimistic that it will receive the necessary study that it requires. Okay.
So I guess the message for people here tonight is really just we have to hold tight and see what's going to happen over the coming months and years and decades even. And see really what sort of impact that has. So I talked in the intro about the new stats that were recently released by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada looking at projections of increasing cases of dementia over the next 30 years. But really, that doesn't account for this.
That's not taken into consideration. No.
Yeah. Okay. So we might have another report in another 5 years that's outlining totally different projections than what we see right now. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks very much for that, Dr. Weaver. We'll leave that for now. I see that there's lots of questions popping up in the Q&A. I'm going to ignore them for now. And I'm gonna wait until we get.
We're gonna focus on your questions, and we'll try to address those, come back to those at the end. Yeah.
So I'm gonna switch gears to talk about research into treatment options a little bit. We know that there's no cure for dementia, but always hoping that there's going to be a new treatment option that can address symptoms or slow down progression. So our next news story is an article published in Medical News Today, in which a couple of studies were cited suggesting that although there is no current clear evidence to confirm the beneficial properties of cannabidiol, initial research shows that it could help with behavioral changes associated with dementia and that it could help remove plaques from the brain. I'm wondering, Dr. Weaver, if you can first, for us, distinguish between cannabidiol and cannabis, and then talk a little bit about if there's been enough research to back cannabidiol as a safe treatment for dementia.
Okay. Well, I mean, if I had $1 for every time I got asked that question, I'd be voting in from the Caribbean. Cannabis or marijuana, the whole plant has a wide range of different chemicals in it. If you actually look like it's a leaf. And if you say, you know, how many different chemicals in it, just in the leaf itself, there's probably over 400. How many of those have biological activity, potentially medical activity? You know, it's disputed, but it's usually put in around somewhere between 60 and 80 different components of it seem to have some biological properties. Now, of them, the two which get the most study, the first one is cannabidiol, CBD, the one that you've been talking about. And then the other one is THC. Now, in terms of neurologic effects on the brain, CBD or cannabidiol is the one that attracts the most attention. It initially attracted the most attention in the area of epilepsy. And it's approved in some places as a treatment for intractable epilepsy. Certainly CBD oil seems to have some benefit for some people with epilepsy. Now, the CBD does not have any psychotropic effects. It does not give you a feeling of well-being or relaxation or anything like that. It's simply a neurologic one, which doesn't have, as I said, a whole lot of these psychotropic properties. Most of those come from the other well-studied constituent of marijuana, which is the THC. Now, and so, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, I have patients explaining to me, because they've all read on Dr. Google, and everyone reads Dr. Google before they come see their physician. They all come in and saying, well, CBD it's very neurologically active. It must be good. The THC component, causes relaxation. What about an individual, who has a dementing disorder, who is agitated, etc.? Wouldn't this be of benefit to them? I think that the broader picture here also, please remember that the use of marijuana products is frequently associated with memory impairment. It is not exactly a minor issue. This is a drug that can also affect your memory. Despite what is, as Rick talked about in the general press and the common press, I am not a big fan of it. I don't recommend it to any of my patients. I think that, I'm sorry if I'm really not trying to duck the questions. I'm simply reflecting, the state of knowledge or lack thereof. That just as we don't know if COVID is a long-term risk for Alzheimer's, I don't think we know what the role is yet for marijuana in this population, individuals with dementia or with Alzheimer's disease. I just loathe when researchers go, more research is necessary. You go, oh, that's what they say all the time. But unfortunately, I think that this is true in this instance. Marijuana is, there's a lot of hype about it, and there's a lot of people who are very passionate supporters of it. As I said, it affects memory, it affects a lot of other things. And, I think the jury's still out, and I am not recommending it for any of my patients.
Well, and I hear you. I think that is sometimes a frustrating answer for people who really are desperate for something that might help them and are really looking for things, because there aren't a lot of options. And we know that when there aren't a lot of great treatment options, people look for things. But it is important. And when you talk sort of facetiously about Dr. Google, it is important that people have hope for things that realistically can deliver something, and that they come to reliable sources of information like yourself, like their family doctor, like the Alzheimer's Society, because false hope is no hope. And so when people Google and they think that maybe this will work, and I'm going to try it and I'm excited about it, and then if it doesn't, there's disappointment. So
sorry, but someone popped up with CBD oil.
Oh, sure.
When I see CBD oil, that is a marijuana product. And I'm including that in this statement that we just don't know. We just don't know. Individuals with Alzheimer's disease and dementia are having enough problems with their brain chemistry. I'm not keen on further compounding the situation and making them more docile and to get along with things, that's not necessarily a good thing. So, let's wait and see on this particular one.
Yeah, and for audience information, that's the Alzheimer's Society of Canada's position as well, that the jury is out. Talk to your own family doctor as well. So thank you for that, Dr. Weaver. We're going to move on to our next item, but we have another poll that we're going to launch, just gauging a little bit of participant understanding of causes of dementia. So this poll asks our participants, which classification do you think Alzheimer's disease belongs to? Naturally occurring brain disease, mental health disorder. You're not allowed to react to which one you think it is. You can't skew the audience experience here, Dr. Weaver. Mental health disorder, autoimmune disease, all of the above, none of the above. I'll give people just a minute here. I can see it all moving across. I don't think participants can see that, but maybe they can, but I can see it moving all over the place. Let's give another couple of seconds here for people to answer. So I'm going to say that the vast majority, no, I can't say the vast majority. There is no vast majority in this one. Look at that. 31% think all of the above. 27% of people think it's a naturally occurring brain disease. 23% think none of the above. 11% autoimmune disease. 8% mental health disorder. I'm going to guess too that for a lot of participants, they're not sure what the distinction is between those various categories. But Dr. Weaver, you were recently featured in the Globe and Mail, where you said that you think Alzheimer's disease is an autoimmune disease. So yep. I'm wondering if you can tell us what an autoimmune disease is, and maybe versus what, mental health disorder or a naturally occurring brain disease, and why you think that Alzheimer's might be one.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start off by saying that I think it's important to, emphasize that dementia and Alzheimer's disease are not a natural consequence of aging. They are disease like any other disease that are caused by pathology or something going wrong. And because of that, hopefully we will be getting treatments in future. Conventionally, we have thought of Alzheimer's disease as a chronic progressive neurodegenerative disease. And by that, I mean that the brain actually shrinks, becomes what we call atrophied or becomes smaller, and brain cells start to die off within the brain. And even if we go back to 1907, when Alzheimer's first described this, it was recognized that there was this protein clumping up in the brain, which was called beta amyloid, and another one clumping up that we now recognize as tau. And traditionally, it has been thought that it is a chronic neurologic disease because this abnormal protein called amyloid clumps up and kills brain cells. And that there was a lot to support that notion. There was a lot to support that idea, but it hasn't translated into any useful drugs. And that's what the amyloid hypothesis, as it's called, is so controversial. I like to say that Alzheimer's disease is in desperate need of new ideas. We've been flogging the same ideas for 3 decades, and although we've learned a lot, and I don't mean to in any way downplay the value of the research over the last 30 years, it's still true that it hasn't converted to a drug. We're still having the same conversation that we had last year, and that it's been ongoing for a while. And so I find it gratifying that a whole lot of new ideas are coming to the foreground now and aren't being beaten down. People are saying, let's hear about them. And so one of the new ideas that is coming out is one that we've originated and pushed, is that Alzheimer's is a type of autoimmune disease. Maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong, but at least it's a new idea, and at least it's motivating people to think and to think differently. And I think that is so crucial. So just in a nutshell, to talk about it as an autoimmune disease, autoimmune diseases are diseases in which the immune system makes a mistake and attacks the body in which it is located. So the immune system becomes overexcited and attacks the body itself. So in our thinking about Alzheimer's disease, we regard that beta amyloid isn't an abnormal protein, but is in fact a normal protein in your brain. It's part of your brain's immune system. And that if you get an infection, COVID-19, or if you get repetitive head trauma, if you live in an area with a very high density of air pollution, all these things are known to turn on the immune system in the brain and to cause beta amyloid to be produced in the brain. It is known that beta amyloid has antibacterial properties. Beta amyloid, that peptide that everyone thinks causes Alzheimer's disease, it is death to bacteria. You put it on bacteria and it kills them. It's very, very potent at killing viruses and bacteria. Unfortunately, it also kills brain cells. And so our theory is based upon the notion that something turns on the immune system in your brain, beta amyloid is produced, it goes around looking for bacteria or viruses to kill, but it really can't tell a bacteria from a brain cell, and oops, it starts killing brain cells in the process. That then is autoimmunity. So that's how we think about it. And I mean, it's pointing in new directions on how drugs can be developed, and that's what we're working in. That's our approach. Maybe it'll pan out, maybe it won't, just like everything else, time will tell.
I feel like everybody watching is going, huh? Like it is a whole new way of thinking about things, and it does lead to totally different potential solutions, right? Different paths.
Okay, so I'm going to shamelessly plug myself right now. There is a website called The Conversation.
Okay.
It publishes articles, and 2 days ago we published a very brief, very readable article. It's like 800 words on this theory, so one can go to The Conversation and read it. It's also was picked up by multiple other science sites that distribute stories. But I'm happy to say that. In the approximately 36 hours that story's been live online, it's had 823,000 reads. With a lot of people saying, wow, that's an interesting idea. And people going, no, that can't be right. And that's good. I mean, that's what we want. We want people, I don't want people to believe everything and swallow everything hook, line, and sinker. The whole point of science is to be questioned. And to make people think. And clearly this is making people think, and that's gratifying. That's good.
We want new ideas.
Who knows? Maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong, but you're thinking, and that's what counts.
Well, let's see if maybe we'll get 272 more views of that. I don't know if Sam or Emily, who are wizards in the background here, could get that into the chat. Oh, there they go. If folks are interested in that, there's the link in the chat to go and find out more about that. And, you mentioned, Dr. Weaver, maybe it'll pan out, maybe it won't. Well, you could not lead better into my next question, which is one that does refer back to a topic we talked about last year, our old friend aducanumab, which is probably something that most folks on here, because everybody who's joining cares is one way or another about dementia. And aducanumab was so exciting when it came on the scene, and we talked about it last year. And there's been some developments since then. it has not been approved in Canada, and it hasn't just not been approved, it's been not approved. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit, maybe for people who aren't so familiar, just a quick refresher on what aducanumab is. But what happened? It seemed exciting, and now it seems like it's something that's not even in consideration for distribution here in Canada.
It's still controversial. But on the teeter-totter of controversy, there's more negative than positive. However, so when we talk about therapeutics, drugs that make people better, the two broad categories right now are small molecule drugs and biologics. So small molecule drugs are traditional drugs, things like aspirin and penicillin, which in the chemistry world are just small little molecules. Biologics are much bigger molecules. And biologics are usually things like antibodies and proteins and larger things. Widely used, say, in rheumatology to treat things like rheumatoid arthritis, etc. And so aducanumab is a biologic, so it's an antibody, and it targets clumps of amyloid. So as I mentioned, the traditional thinking about Alzheimer's disease has been that it's caused by clumps of amyloid. And this is an antibody that goes after those tiny little clumps and cleans them up. No one is doubting that it does exactly as advertised. It's a very effective antibody. It's very effective at going after those clumps of beta amyloid. That is not questioned in the slightest. The stumbling blocks are, so will that make Alzheimer's disease better? And, because then you have to believe that clumps of amyloid cause Alzheimer's disease. And there's lots of people who don't even believe that. So you may be taking a drug that treats a mechanism that has nothing to do with the disease. The other issue is it's got toxicity. And up to 40% of people who take this drug can get side effects, including brain swelling. So the controversy around it is, here's a drug that works by a mechanism that may have nothing to do with the disease, and it's certainly got a lot of side effects.
Right.
That has to be judged against, we're talking about Alzheimer's disease here, a very serious disease that affects my brain, and you've got nothing for it. I'm willing to take it, even if it, on the outside chance that it might work. I mean, and those are the two opposing views that we get here. And I understand both sides of the story. It's a very passionate one. When it was first introduced, there was a lot of optimism in the United States from the company's point of view that it would sell well. It was very, very expensive. And it didn't sell well because lots of physicians said, I'm not giving it to my patients. And so it was disappointing. Then following that, it really failed in Europe. And if you lose, Europe, that's a huge market to lose. The Canadian market, from a company's point of view, we're not big. And if sales are lagging in the United States, the cost of introducing a drug, the cost of marketing a drug versus the revenues you will make from it, it hasn't been worthwhile. So aducanumab, it was definitely a well thought out approach. The drug does as advertised.
Right.
But I think that other biologics are now coming out, and I would like to think that aducanumab did serve an important role. It laid groundwork for how drugs can be introduced. It laid groundwork for how we can think about new drugs, because Alzheimer's isn't like other diseases, and the conventional thinking that are used to approve other diseases aren't going to work with Alzheimer's. And I think aducanumab has importantly pointed that out. So, I mean, Biogen may say, it failed. Once again, it has added an immense amount of information and immense amount of knowledge. The final point I'll just want to make here is that I always love comparing Alzheimer's disease to high blood pressure. if you have high blood pressure, you go see your family physician and they don't say, I have the high blood pressure pill for you. Here, take it. Here is the high blood pressure pill.
Right.
There's all sorts of different pills on the market for high blood pressure. They all work by different mechanisms. And in some people, depending on the nature and the cause of their high blood pressure, they get different pills, they get mixtures of them, etc. And high blood pressure from a mechanistic point of view is trivial compared to Alzheimer's disease.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's naive to think that there's a magic bullet, that there's going to be one drug, and you go, I got Alzheimer's and I'm going to take it and it's going to go away. I think that is wishful thinking.
I think that also goes back to your earlier comments around it being an autoimmune disease. If we don't even know what the disease is, finding
we don't even know if it's one disease. We don't even know if it's one disease. I mean, maybe we're just not good enough yet to differentiate multiple types, and we have them all grouped together. So, I mean, what I hope is that down the road, we have 4 or 5 different drugs for what we now think of as Alzheimer's. You'll go in, they'll do some blood work on you, and they'll go, you have this type. Therefore, you get primarily this drug with a little bit of this one, and that's going to be mixtures, much like how high blood pressure is treated. But the big problem here is that clinical trials for high blood pressure, here, take the pill. 2 weeks later, they measure your pressure and they see if it works. The clinical trials for Alzheimer's take years. They're very expensive. And the government bureaucracy for approval processes are prohibitive. So this is still a rocky road, and we still got to push a lot of boulders uphill before we get there.
Okay, that leads beautifully into our next poll question, which we'll put up here in just a second. Okay, there you go. Do you think there will be significant research finding on dementia cause or treatment in the next 10 to 15 years? I guess this is fundamentally a question about optimism and how much we think our community will be able to come together and fund research to understand the causes of the disease.
Well, I'm pathologically optimistic.
Well, we need optimistic people who have reason to be optimistic and who have resources at their disposal to use that optimism to find new ways of thinking and new treatments, right? So the work that you're doing is so important. So it looks like...
Go ahead. Sorry, I'll shut up. I'll wait till the poll's done. Oh, okay. I know how I would vote on this. I would be voting yes.
Okay. Well, I think probably a lot of people would like to know how you voted on this.
Yeah.
So 50% of people voted yes, 36 maybe, and 15 no. But you would be in the yes category.
Oh, I'm strongly in the yes category, and I'm glad that this poll is worded the way it is. Research finding, and you have cause or treatment, because I think another really, really important issue here are diagnostics, which we haven't been talking about. Because it's not like you think, do I have Alzheimer's? And you go and somebody measures a blood pressure and goes, oh, your serum Alzheimer's factor is this, therefore you do. We don't have that either. So we don't have a diagnosis. We're still getting you to spell the word world backwards. And we don't have treatments. And I know from a superficial point of view, people go, well, you weren't treating it 10 years ago and you're not treating it now. But immense progress has been made. We know a hell of a lot more than we did 10 years ago about this disease. And even though aducanumab has not been the success that so many people had hoped for, once again, as I mentioned, you just learn so much. The brain is the most complicated thing in the universe, and Alzheimer's is the most complicated disease of the brain. So it's taking us a long time, but with good reason. And so each one of these things gives us information. I think we're going to have a really good diagnostics within 5 years, and I think we're going to have meaningful drugs within 10 years.
Well, I hope you're right, Dr. Weaver. I know for a lot of people watching, it's just frustrating when something like educating
Oh my God, it certainly
doesn't
is.
work out.
Yes.
So it's really good, I think, to hear that for somebody who's working in that field, that it actually is a step forward, even if it didn't work out the way we hoped it would, that it moved us somewhere.
It does. It moves the needle ahead.
So this was going to be our last topic, except for then the schmooze came out that I referred to earlier. So I'm going to ask you about that at the end. But so our nearly final story was shocking, frankly, for those of us, at least in the field. About a month ago, there was a story that there was a fabrication of Alzheimer's research. And we have a video that we're going to play talking about this.
A shocking new whistleblower report claims data on Alzheimer's disease may have been fabricated. The potentially bogus information has been cited in hundreds of scientific articles. It's part of an experimental Alzheimer's drug. The allegations in Science magazine are reverberating through the science community and beyond.
What is the basis of this story? How worried about this are we? What does this mean?
Every barrel of apple has a few bad apples. Does this sort of stuff happen? Yes. Does it happen widely? No. The world of science is very competitive. When one applies for grants, you have to list how many papers you have published. And they always talk about what's the impact factor of the journals in which you have published, how important is the journal in which you publish your work. The big journals, the two biggest journals in basic science are Nature and Science. And the two big journals in the clinical world are The Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. If you get a paper in any one of those four journals, you're probably going to get your raise at the end of the year. And, if you get a paper on Alzheimer's disease in Nature, the next time you apply for a grant, you're probably going to get it because you got a paper in Nature. So the motivation, and unfortunately some individuals, to make that paper have just a little more punch, and the data wasn't quite as sharp as it could be. Let's just, touch it up a little bit here and there to make it look better. Unfortunately, that's fabrication, and that's wrong. But you publish it, and it's out there, and it's out there forever. Mm-hmm. And so sooner or later, you're going to get caught, because the whole nature of science, which I mentioned before, is ideas. And people look at them, people question them. And so, you look at this and you go, well, that's interesting, but wait a minute, I can't reproduce anything these people did. And that immediately is the red flag. If you can't reproduce it, then maybe it wasn't produced in the first place. And maybe it was fabricated. So unfortunately, this happens. 300 papers a month are retracted across all of science. I'm not just talking Alzheimer's here, I'm talking about everything in science. So, this happens. It's not common, but it happens. I think the comments that this, was really negative about the amyloid hypothesis. No, I don't know if I agree with that. I think that was overstated. The amyloid hypothesis was chugging along, and it still has its supporters and its opponents. And I don't think that this affected that in any major way. I think it just emphasizes the fact that, if somebody has spectacular results, they have to be reproduced. Other labs have to reproduce the results before they're believable. Never believe a result that has come from one paper or one lab. Believe it after it's come from multiple labs and has been reproduced. Then it's safe. And that is how science works.
So it's more a reminder for academia on the process, and not so much a reason for cynicism amongst us globally.
No, I don't think so. And I mean, it made good press. but overall, do I think that this has set back Alzheimer's research? No, I do not. I don't even think it was a speed bump.
I think
we've
that's
continued
important
along.
context for people to have, that there
Yep.
are things in place to make sure that the research that's being done is being done well, that it's meaningful, and that it can
Yes.
have an impact, and that people can trust the research.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the schmoose. There was a story today in the London Times titled "Gene Mutation Raises Alzheimer's Risk by 50%. And I'm kind of laughing. This isn't even the point of the story. I'm just laughing at, I don't know who names all of these various proteins involved in Alzheimer's disease, because this one said high levels of the mutated version of the microprotein called schmoose, like moose with an SH on the start, were linked to rogue tau proteins that build up in the brain and cause plaques, which lead to Alzheimer's. But the key point in this is really actually that they think a gene mutation might raise your Alzheimer's risk by 50%, which is huge. So
It's
I just
huge.
wonder if you can comment on that.
Sure, I can. Well, I'm going to go back to the previous story. I'm not in any way suggesting this is fabricated. I think this is very real. But it's one lab, one paper out. You have to wait until multiple people reproduce it, et cetera, et cetera. And, and I suspect that this will be reproduced. I think this is rock solid, but, you wait until it has been reproduced. So as I was mentioning earlier, more and more people are coming up with more and more new ideas and thoughts about what are the causes of Alzheimer's disease, thinking outside of necessarily things clumping up. And one of these areas of interest is something called mitochondria. So in every one of our cells, we have these little energy factories called mitochondria. And the mitochondria is the little part within a cell, which really lets the cell generate the energy that lets it work. And if you got mitochondrial problems, if you have sick mitochondria, you're in trouble. You got a disease. And quite understandably, there are people who believe that Alzheimer's disease may come from a mitochondrial cause. And there is a broad and wide literature on the role of mitochondria in Alzheimer's disease, which is very sound and very good. And I think that's an interesting idea. And this particular schmoose gene is the gene that codes for a very small protein that is found in mitochondria. And if you get a mutation in this, you have problems with the energy portion of your cells. So it could very well be a marker or a genetic trait that predisposes to Alzheimer's disease. This might turn out to be a very exciting and one of those biomarkers that I was referring to earlier, so that, hopefully in future, when you go see, your physician and you're diagnosed with a variant, a subtype, you got type 1 or type M or B or whatever you want to call it, Alzheimer's disease. They'll do a test and go, oh, you got a heavy mitochondrial component in this. We got the drug for you.
The kinds of distinctions you see, for example, in breast cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think this is wonderful. This is great. This is, this disease moving ahead as it should, with lots of ideas, lots of new directions, lots of things to explore, which, hopefully in the not too distant future are going to coalesce into, how we can come up with some meaningful therapeutics. And unfortunately, mitochondria, there's no way you can make your mitochondria better. Because I get asked this too, because people come in and saying, do I have sick mitochondria? And I go, well, I got no way of knowing. But and they go, is there any food I can eat? Any natural product will help my mitochondria? And unfortunately, if you go on Google, you can probably find it, but no. Bummer. So the mitochondria.
Yeah, we get those questions a lot here at the Alzheimer's Society as
Of
well.
course. Yep.
Do see things and want to know, is there something they can do? Is there something I can eat?
Well, what you can do is look at those risk factors. Look at those risk factors and avoid those risk factors. Yep.
Absolutely, 100%. Okay, we're done with my questions. We have 15 minutes left. Nuh-uh.
Oh, now the hard questions start.
We are going to go to the Q&A, folks. So I'm going to open it up and see what's in here because I have no idea what you guys have been asking as we've been going along. And Dr. Weaver, I don't know. Do you want me to just throw these out to you? Or
Sure. Okay. And all of a sudden you'll see me do this. That's my way of ducking the question.
Is it possible for vascular dementia to be halted?
Okay. So vascular dementia is probably the number 2 type of dementia after Alzheimer's disease. So if you look at the natural course of Alzheimer's disease, it's downhill. If you look at an individual who has vascular dementia, they tend to move down in a stepward fashion. So when you see people with vascular dementia, they're at a step. Your goal is let's not take the step down to the next step. Let's keep them plateaued where they are. And so aggressive treatment of high blood pressure, aggressive treatment of elevated cholesterol levels, aggressive treatment of the vascular risk factors will certainly help in preventing vascular dementia from progressing at the rate at which it is, hopefully keep the individual plateaued longer. And so, are we going to reverse it? No, but can we prevent it from getting worse? We can slow it down.
It's back to a lot of those standard healthy lifestyle choices that we keep coming back to and keep hearing about. All right, next one. Type 1 diabetics are less at risk than type 2 because it isn't a weight issue. So as a question. Because extra weight.
So I mean, when we talk about metabolic syndrome and these, the first question that you had was related to vascular issues and metabolic issues. Those are usually centered around type 2 diabetics. Because I mean, you can sometimes modify type 2 diabetics with weight restriction and dietary restrictions and other issues. They don't have to be insulin dependent. And so because of this, the risk factors that we're talking are related to type 2 diabetes. Okay,
the next question is similar. In response to the discussion about metabolic syndrome is a risk. So is regular exercise a way to lessen that risk? And I think you've sort of already indicated.
Says he who never exercises, but you better exercise.
Well, there is a reality that we all know what we should probably be doing to improve our general health, and sometimes it's still hard to make those choices. And so we're just going to reemphasize that tonight. And I think that was sort of part of the point of that part of tonight, is that it's not just for your heart health and your cancer risk, though those are important too. They do reduce your dementia risk. And if you're here, you probably care about your dementia risk. You care about it somehow, that it is another reason to do it. Okay, I'm going to leave that diabetes. If you haven't covered this already, I recently read that Alzheimer's may be tied into an autoimmune disorder. Oh, we've covered that. Okay. Oh,
and you are excellent reading. You keep reading that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Does the lack of sleep? Oh, that's a good one. Not that the others weren't good ones. They are also good. This is just a new one.
Yes.
Does the lack of sleep affect the cause of dementia or Alzheimer's disease?
Excellent question. And because that is an area which is getting a whole lot of study. And certainly, the optimal amount of sleep is 7 hours or more. Well, not 2 more, because your actual risk goes up if you're sleeping 12 or 13.
There's a sweet spot.
Yeah, the sweet spot. That's it. The sweet spot is 7 or 8 hours. And people who have, problems with chronic insomnia certainly have an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And sleeping pills are not the answer, because if you routinely use sleep aids to force you into that 7 or 8 hours, it is not. You're not getting benefit from it from the point of view of
so your
Alzheimer's
body knows
disease.
The difference.
Oh, your body knows the difference.
Okay.
There's a wide range of different theories, but I mean, certainly maintenance maintenance of your brain happens when you're sleeping. That's when the garbage gets taken out. That's when the corners get swept. That's when the cleanup cells do their cleaning up. And if you're only sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, they don't have the time that they need to do their job completely. And the consequence of that is increased susceptibility to dementia.
Okay, well, so that is something that maybe some of us can do something about, focus on sleep, make it a priority. Maybe
Yep.
some people I know really struggle with insomnia and would be challenged with that, but some of those
If you're having trouble falling asleep, there's this book, it's called A Textbook of Medicinal Chemistry by Weaver.
I heard it's amazing.
If you start to read it, I guarantee you that by about page 4, you'll be...
Oh, that is not what I've heard. I've heard it's a page turner. All right, the next one. My mother has dementia. Is my risk increased?
Common question. So, but, there are certain genetic dementias, of course, genetic Alzheimer's disease, but they're definitely in the minority. The majority of individuals who get Alzheimer's disease have late onset Alzheimer's disease in their older years, and this we refer to as sporadic. It happens, and there doesn't tend to be a whole lot of genetic components to it. So in general, you should be okay.
Okay. I'm going to try this next one, but there's a word in here I don't know. Can you discuss the link between anticholinergics and dementia?
Okay.
Is it safe to use in small doses for perimenopause?
There has been a lot of interest in people who are exposed a lot to anticholinergic drugs or drugs which have an anticholinergic function, and that predisposes. And once again, the epidemiologists, the people who look at people who've had Alzheimer's disease, have found out that excessive exposure to these sorts of drugs does predispose them to it. So just in case you're wondering, acetylcholine is a chemical in the brain that's called a neurotransmitter. And so when one brain cell wants to talk to another brain cell, it sends a message across a gap called a synapse. And frequently the messenger is this chemical called acetylcholine. And many of the symptoms which occur in Alzheimer's disease occur because we just don't have enough of this acetylcholine. Your brain isn't communicating within itself well enough, and that results in the memory problems, the disordered cognition, and those sorts of issues. So if you're taking an anticholinergic, a drug which is against choline or acetylcholine, then that can affect memory, and in the long term may contribute to dementia. Certainly, taken intermittently, occasionally, there's no problems. If you've taken them all the time, that's a problem.
All right. Do dementia symptoms, and I promised that we'd have people out of here on time. Probably not actually, but only by a couple minutes. 7 more minutes, 22 more questions. Do dementia symptoms wax and wane in the beginning?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, you wanted more answer than that. I thought you were like, these are the quick snappers.
The person asking probably wants more.
Early in the course, a fluctuating course is the norm.
Okay. How are they measuring the COVID in the brain?
Badly. This is an area, and I shouldn't say badly. I mean, there's good work going on, but I mean by that I meant it's not broad enough. And being brutal here, early in the course of the disease, more people were dying. Now that we have a lot of vaccines and a lot of other things, people get the disease, but they're not dying. When you have a lot of people dying, there's a lot of pathology, a lot of brains that you can look at under a microscope. We don't have that now. That having been said, there's a whole lot of work going on with improved imaging of the brain using MRI and other ways of looking at it. So this is an important area, which is, once again, in evolution. I think that, another couple of years, we'll have a much better handle on looking at what COVID's doing in the brain. We're not quite there yet.
Okay. And I actually should say, I don't mean to be dismissive of any of these questions. The question before on waxing and waning of dementia, call us at the Alzheimer's Society. We can certainly talk to you more about that. And in fact, about any of these questions that come up later or that we don't get to now. We'd be happy if you want to follow up with us later to answer any and all.
Good resource. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just skip down and see if there's any research on psychedelics. I guess that kind of goes with the I
mean, it's starting. I mean, I think that is an interesting question from the point of view of the overlap between depression and dementia. Depression is a risk factor for dementia. Many people with dementia become depressed. And so this is one of these disorders where, you know, there's a big overlap between depression and dementia. And psychedelics are being studied more so in their application for depression. But I think that any advances we make in depression may down the road be advances in dementia.
Well, there's an awful lot of interest in mental health these days.
Yeah.
And I think more attention being paid. And so maybe there will be advances there that benefit us.
We can hope. Fingers
Is there
crossed.
a test that will determine if one will get Alzheimer's?
As I mentioned, diagnostics are important. So increasingly there are blood tests now for measuring your blood levels of amyloid and your blood levels of tau. They're becoming available. They're a bit more widely available in the United States than in Canada. So, you know, I think that these tests have validity, will be useful, will be entering the widespread marketplace in the coming years. And we're all excited about them because this will represent a step forward. So, I mean, can you go see your family physician now and get a blood test? No, but stay tuned.
Okay. And I think this might be the last question that I ask. With a suggestion that Alzheimer's might be autoimmune, what does it have in common with diseases such as ALS and MS? Manitoba has high MS rates. So I don't know if there's actually a connection between those two.
Yep. Okay. Yes, Manitoba has very high multiple sclerosis rates. I'm not an MS doc, but certainly when I was training, I remember looking at the statistics for Canada, and Manitoba stands out, you know, as an area that is a hotbed for multiple sclerosis. Interestingly, multiple sclerosis follows lines of latitude. So in Canada, we have a lot more MS than, say, in Mexico. Equatorial countries, MS is rare, whereas in countries like ours, it's relatively common. When we talk about diseases that involve inflammation of the brain, multiple sclerosis is the prototypic example. It is the disease in which you get inflammation in the brain. There are biologics, there's lots of other things that are being used to treat MS, and MS has, you know, there's lots of good agents out there for dealing with MS. I don't think that those agents will be simply able to be moved sideways from MS into Alzheimer's. I think that the inflammatory processes that we're seeing are sufficiently different that it's not a direct importing drugs from MS into Alzheimer's. But once again, you learn from the other diseases. So I think that MS has taught us a lot about the role of the immune system in the brain. And I think that we in Alzheimer's could learn a lot from MS researchers. Now, in terms of ALS, ALS is certainly another area of very active research. It's another area in which proteins clump up. It's not the same two proteins, but it's another disease in which proteins clump up. It's another disease in which there is inflammation. So this wide range of diseases, there's Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ALS, you know, they share a lot. And so lessons learned from one can be applied to others. And so, you know, just because, you know, advances aren't being made in Alzheimer's, advances are also being made in Parkinson's and ALS. And you got to keep reading the literature from my point of view in science. looking at everyone research, because we can learn lessons from others.
100%. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Weaver.
Well, thank you. This is fun.
It is kind of fun, isn't it? I hope that everybody,
this is a good time.
I hope everybody who's participating tonight had a good time. I'm going to also let you know that for those of you who are perhaps caring for somebody who has dementia, we have our Care for You family conference coming up on October 22nd. There's some information there. You can go to our website. I'll ask maybe if our chat folks can put our website and phone number, if it's not in the chat already, to put it up there, both for the Care for You conference, which I think you'll find really valuable. But also I do know there's lots of questions there that we didn't get to, and that this conversation may prompt other ones. And so please do get in touch with us. We'd be happy to speak with you about those. I do want to take another minute to thank our sponsor, Brightwater Senior Living. We really appreciate their support. I want to thank everybody who came out tonight. You get to do it from your home, which is so nice about this. And Dr. Weaver, you're such a fantastic speaker. You make all of the complex research topics so accessible for those of us who are not researchers. And so I really appreciate that you take time to come and speak to a group of Manitobans who are really, really interested in this topic, and who I know
I would have preferred a trip to Winnipeg, but
next year, hopefully, we'll be able to do this in person. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful night. And thank you, Dr. Weaver.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.